March 2021, a quiet woman from Zanzibar became president of Tanzania. The world celebrated because finally we had a female leader who seemed like she would do things differently. But 4 years later, her biggest critic is sitting in a jail cell, facing life in prison for treason. His crime? Giving speeches about fair elections. This is the story of Samia Hassan. You probably remember the headlines calling her Tanzania's hope and Africa's democratic future. We all believed it because she was supposed to be different. She promised freedom after years of brutal control under her predecessor. But instead of becoming the reformer we hoped for, she became the very monster she once opposed. To understand how we got here, you need to know about the man who came before her. John Magufuli ruled Tanzania like a dictator. There were no opposition rallies, no independent newspapers, and absolutely no dissent. If you spoke out against Magufuli, you simply disappeared. Then COVID hit, and while the world shut down, Magufuli declared Tanzania virus-free. People were dying, but he banned vaccines anyway. In March 2021, Magufuli died suddenly. They said it was heart problems, but everyone whispered the same thing. It was COVID. The constitution was clear. Vice President Samia Hassan will take over. Nobody knew what to expect from this quiet economist from Zanzibar, and nobody saw what was coming. Samia was Magufuli's complete opposite. Where he shouted, she whispered. Where she confronted, she consulted. Where he ruled by fear, she seemed to rule by consensus. For 6 years as vice president, she had been practically invisible, working quietly on development projects while Magufuli grabbed headlines with his brutality. She spoke perfect English, understood diplomacy, and knew how to charm international leaders. When she became president, the world thought we finally had someone different. They had no idea how right they were, just not in the way they expected. Samia's first year looked like a miracle because she moved fast to undo years of damage. Remember those banned newspapers? Overnight, they were back. The Citizen, Mwananchi, and other publications that had been silenced for years were suddenly back on every street corner. For the first time in forever, journalists could ask tough questions without looking over their shoulders or living in fear. But what shocked everyone most was that opposition rallies were suddenly allowed. After 6 years of silence, democracy felt alive again. Opposition leaders who had fled the country started booking flights home because they actually believed things had changed. They were about to learn how much that belief will cost them. Most importantly, Samia admitted the truth about COVID. Vaccination programs started, and Tanzania rejoined international health efforts. That decision alone probably saved thousands of lives. The world fell head over heels for Samia Hassan. Summit invitations poured in, development aid flowed, and she became the poster child for African female leadership. One moment in January 2023 captured all that hope perfectly, and it involved Tanzania's most wanted opposition leader, Tundu Lissu. Back in 2017, assassins had shot him multiple times, and he barely survived. He fled to Belgium and spent 6 years in exile while Magufuli hunted his supporters like animals. His decision to come home was huge, because if Tanzania's most hunted critic felt safe returning, maybe things really had changed. For over a year, Lissu organized freely. He gave speeches, held rallies, and prepared for elections. He was the man who trusted Samia enough to come home, but he was about to become her prime target. 2024 was the year everything changed, the year the mask came off. In September 2024, Ali Kibao was abducted. He was a senior opposition official with 3 kids and a reputation as a peaceful organizer. Days later, they found his body. His party says he was beaten and doused with acid. President Samia condemned the killing and promised investigations. But months later, there was 0 arrests. Human rights groups started noticing a pattern. Opposition members were disappearing, and some came back broken and silent. Others, like Ali Kibao, didn't come back at all. In August 2024, opposition parties announced nationwide rallies, just asking for fair elections. The government's response was swift and brutal. Over one weekend, hundreds were arrested across the country, and police surrounded rally venues before anyone even showed up. Imagine being an opposition supporter that weekend. You wake up excited to finally have your voice heard, but by nightfall, you're in a police cell. The brief democratic spring was over, and opposition leaders found themselves back where they started, behind bars. The final blow came in April 2025, when Tundu Lissu was charged with treason. His crime: giving speeches criticizing the government and calling for fair elections. If convicted, he faces life in prison. The hunter had finally caught her prey. But Samia's reach was growing beyond Tanzania's border. In January 2025, Maria Sarungi thought she was safe in Nairobi. She was a Tanzanian activist living in exile in Kenya, protected by international law, or so she thought. She claims Tanzanian agents kidnapped her from the streets of Nairobi. Both governments denied it, but after international pressure, she was suddenly released. The message was crystal clear: you can run to the ends of the earth, but we will still find you. In May 2025, 2 more activists, one Ugandan and one Kenyan, were allegedly detained by Tanzanian forces just for working on human rights issues. Reports says they were tortured, and both were eventually dumped at the border after severe abuse. These weren't just arrests. They were diplomatic crises that showed how far Samia was willing to go to silence any voice of dissent. No border could protect you now. Remember that international love affair with Samia? it was turning into a very public breakup. In October 2025, the European Parliament passed a resolution demanding Tundu Lissu's release and condemning the systemic hunting of opposition figures. These were the same European leaders who had praised Samia as a democratic reformer and invited her to every summit. Now they were calling her out by name. The United States was even more blunt, expressing deep concern about the treatment of activists. The woman who had once been the darling of every international summit was now increasingly isolated. The world was watching, and it didn't like what it saw. Samia's supporters had their defense ready. Look at the economy and look at the growth. They were not wrong. Tanzania's economy was expanding with infrastructure projects, international investment, and new railways. The president's argument was simple. Political stability enables economic development, and critics threaten the peace Tanzania has achieved. But every Tanzanian was asking the same question. What good is a new railway if you can't speak freely about who built it? What good is economic growth if you can't choose who leads you? What good is prosperity if it comes at the cost of your soul? When you step back and look at Samia's presidency, you can see a clear pattern. Democratic openings followed by restrictions. Press freedom that expands then contracts. Opposition space that opens then slams shut. This cycle isn't unique to Tanzania. Across Africa, it's the same story. Leaders promise reform, win international praise, then slowly return to the old ways. But Samia was supposed to be different. Her background, her early moves, her gender, everything suggested she would break the cycle. Maybe we were naive, or maybe the old systems were always stronger than any individual. The ruling party's control, the security apparatus, and the web of interest tied to power might have been too entrenched. Or maybe her story shows us what could have been possible if different choices had been made. As the 2025 elections approach, things keep getting worse. Opposition leaders face legal challenges designed to eliminate them entirely. If you are a journalist in Tanzania today, you write a story and before you publish, you ask yourself, will this get me arrested? That's not journalism. That's survival. For ordinary Tanzanians, the promise of change remains a cruel joke. They hoped for something new, but got the same old system with a different face. Samia Hassan inherited a golden moment with international goodwill, public hope, and the moral authority of being Tanzania's first female president. She could have chosen differently. She could have built real democratic institutions, protected the freedoms she initially restored, and been the transformative leader Tanzania needed. Instead, she chose power. The methods are more subtle now and the rhetoric more polished, but the results are depressingly familiar. She hasn't just disappointed those who hoped for change in Tanzania. She's set back democratic progress across Africa and damaged the credibility of female political leadership worldwide. One woman's choices have affected an entire continent's reputation. As Tanzanians head toward the October 2025 elections, the key question isn't whether Samia will change course, because her path is clear. The real question is survival. Can Tanzania's democratic forces survive another 5 years of gradual authoritarian control? Can activists maintain space to operate? Can opposition parties compete in rigged elections? Now, the only question is whether Tanzania can find a different path forward, with or without her. International observers are already sounding alarms about October's elections, and the world is watching again. This time, we know what to expect.